Welcome to ONNtv's Seniors Calling. I'm your host, Lynn Brown. My guest for this episode is Scottish-born Toronto author Robert MacBain. Mr. MacBain is a former newspaper reporter and public relations consultant. Mr. MacBain is widely regarded as one of Canada's top newspaper reporters and speechwriters. MacBain continues to this day to write editorials and is called upon by various media outlets as an expert on a variety of topics. This Seniors Calling episode has been divided up into two segments. We are airing the second half of the interview in this broadcast. The full interview will be shared on ONNtv's YouTube channel in the near future. During more than 50 years in journalism, politics, and public relations, Robert MacBain has built up a vast deposit of knowledge, experience, and perspective. But it all starts somewhere, and for MacBain it began when he was born in Inverness, Scotland on March 30th in 1937. MacBain and his single mother moved to Canada in 1947, and in our interview he describes what life was like in the early days in Canada for he and his mother. Eventually, Robert would go to work for $40 a week as a reporter at the Barrie Examiner. He moved on to the St. Catharines Standard, the Edmonton Journal, and the Calgary Herald. He then became a senior reporter at the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail, as well as the Telegram. He topped off his successful career in journalism as news director of Toronto radio station 1050 Chum. Robert is married to his wife of 35 years, Maria Minna. Now, Maria Minna has also had a very distinguished career in politics, and she was formerly the International Cooperation Minister for Canada. They have two sons who live out west. Robert MacBain spent almost 28 years as a well-regarded public relations consultant, providing counsel and service to the chief executive officers of major corporations, financial institutions, government departments, hospitals, social service agencies, and trade and professional associations. On the political front, MacBain was director of communications for the 1974 National Liberal Campaign. He was the central media advisor in the 1975 Ontario campaign and speechwriter for Economic Development Minister Don Johnson in the 1984 Liberal Leadership Campaign. He was also a speechwriter for David Peterson in the 1985 Ontario campaign. Robert is the author of two books widely acclaimed: Two Lives Crossing, which was published in 2012, and Their Home and Native Land, published in 2015. And Robert MacBain is currently writing a third book, which is a deep dive into the Indian residential school system. Robert's extensive research has taken him to many places in search of the truth. Their Home and Native Land is well-researched, well-written, and tells a very compelling story. With the skills he honed as one of Canada's top newspaper reporters and speechwriters, author Robert MacBain profiles 4 Ojibwe communities in northwestern Ontario. It will change the perspective many readers have on the place of First Nations in modern Canadian society. The book does not read like a history book. Instead, MacBain offers readers a rich narrative while weaving historical references into a context. The book begins in modern day, 1996, in the Ojibwe community of White Dog in northwestern Ontario. Their Home and Native Land features some truly remarkable and fascinating Ojibways, Mohawk, and Cree people, as well as their positive approach to life. They have a story worth telling, said Robert MacBain, and his truly inspirational book will bring readers behind the scenes into the treaty-making process of 1871 to 1877, with First Nations people living between Thunder Bay and the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. Quotes from official documents describe what First Nation chiefs and representatives of the Canadian government, not of the British Queen, said and did during those negotiations. The book documents the manner in which First Nations who were making the transition from their lifestyle of hunting and fishing and how they were forced off fertile land by land speculators. The book also deals with the abusive manner in which generations of First Nation children were dealt and in the harsh residential school system. My apologies. It may surprise some readers to learn that the first European contact with the Ojibways of the Lake Superior region had was with the King of France. In fact, as he describes it, a war party from Sault Ste. Marie fought alongside General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm at the historic battle on the Plains of Abraham in 1759. MacBain's book, Two Lives Crossing, is about two professors at the University of Toronto in 1974, one of whom was raised as a Blackfoot at a reserve southwest of Calgary, and the other was raised as a white middle-class person, and they both find themselves teaching at the same institution. They find out that not only are they adopted, but that they are brothers. His books, Two Lives Crossing and Their Home and Native Land, are both available on indigo.ca and amazon.ca. So I'm so pleased to share with you the interview with Robert MacBain. Welcome to another edition of Seniors Calling on ONNtv. Well, folks, I have to tell you, the gentleman that I'm about to interview is one that I have been wanting to talk with for quite some time. Scottish-born Toronto author Robert MacBain is a former newspaper reporter, public relations consultant, and is widely regarded as one of Canada's top newspaper reporters and speechwriters. Robert MacBain continues to this day to write and research very important pieces of Canada's history. So welcome to ONNtv, Robert.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Lynn. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, thank you so much, Robert. Now, Robert, I wonder if we could start at the very, very beginning here. Let's talk a little bit about the past, and then we'll bring us up to where we are today. So, Robert, you came from Scotland as a youngster with your mother and ended up in Canada in 1947. And got yourself propelled into writing at a very early age. So can you share with our listeners a little bit about your history there?
Starting in Scotland?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Just briefly, I was born in Inverness, which is the capital of the Highlands, in March 1937. And my dad was the manager of the largest hotel, the manager of the ballroom. And when I was 9 years old, he abandoned me and went to live with his pregnant girlfriend in London.
Oh,
so my mom was very embarrassed at that time. We're talking 1946, actually. Yeah. So she decided that we should move to Toronto to be with family that she had here. And we did that. And in the first 4 years that I was in Toronto, I lived in 7 different houses and went to 3 different schools. So I was quite a mixed up chap. And I wound up leaving home and school about 2 months after my 14th birthday.
Wow.
Went to work in a farm just outside of Toronto.
At a farm?
Yep, a dairy farm. $60 a month with board.
And then eventually you ended up at the Barrie Examiner. Is that correct?
Well, yes, I went forward at a Billy Graham meeting when I was 18.
Okay.
And at that time, I had not completed grade 8. So the Toronto Bible College had a preparatory school. And so I went to the prep school in the morning. I went to night school at night and picked up 4 papers of grade 12. And then when I was 24, I was admitted to the journalism program at Ryerson as a mature student. And they figured that based on my IQ, I was probably the equivalent of the entrance to get into Ryerson.
Nice.
So I was bored out of my mind at Ryerson, spent most of my time practicing as the lead singer for a show we were putting on in the spring. And then in March, I left, got a job at the Barrie Examiner for $40 a week in 1961. And then I went from the Barrie Examiner to the St. Catharines Standard, Edmonton Journal, Calgary Herald, Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, Toronto Telegram, news director at 1050 Chum. I packed all that progress into 8 years, and it cost me my first marriage.
Okay. But you have a wonderful marriage now, a long-lasting marriage to
Wonderful,
Anna.
36 years this December.
To Maria, right, to Marie.
To the Honorable Maria Mina, yes.
That is wonderful. And she has quite a prolific career as well.
She did. She's the former Minister of International Cooperation under Jean Chrétien. And in fact, tonight, they're all up at the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa celebrating the 25th anniversary of their landslide victory back in October 1993. So she's there with Jean Chrétien and some of her colleagues. So I'm very proud of her.
Oh my gosh, Robert, how lovely. And you've taken time out of this, so thank you so much. You were probably going to be accompanying her to that.
No, I'm fine here. I stay out of politics now.
Out of politics now, but not always. Not at one time you were highly regarded in the Pierre Trudeau communications as part of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau communications team when he was Prime Minister. Can you talk a little bit about that for us? Like, give us some of the maybe a couple of good stories that you witnessed there.
Well, I should explain that there are the people you see on TV, the talking heads, the political consultants. A lot of them are involved in campaigns, and then they go work for lobbying companies.
Okay.
And that's sort of one thing. I am really a part-time political person. I get called in because of my expertise in public relations, not because of my political involvements. So in 1974, I was asked to be the director of communications for the National Liberal campaign.
Right.
And at that time, I was responsible for the free time CBC broadcasts.
Okay.
Now, it was a summer election, and I wanted to create the mood of summer, like people rocking in their rocking chairs in the porch. So I had somebody write a guitar piece that went da 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 rum bum bum, and I would have them play it. Then I'm down at the studio in Chum. I've got the guitar playing, and then I bring in an excerpt of Trudeau, and then the guitar, and then Trudeau. Well, the chairman of the Ontario campaign, she hit the roof, and she said, but she thought I had Trudeau in the studio and the guitar guy, and I'm orchestrating this thing. And she said, when the Prime Minister comes into the room, we stand up, we don't play the guitar. This is an absolute outrage. So, and it was a very, very effective free time CBC thing. So I got hauled down to the Ontario headquarters office to account for myself. And I made a point of bringing my 6-year-old son with me because I figured they wouldn't be up with my kid in the room. But she was very, very angry. But we had a great campaign. That campaign, Trudeau was supposed to lose because he had almost lost to Stanfield in 72, and they figured we would have the campaign, and then he would be gone, and John Turner would become the Prime Minister. The Turner people held back in that campaign, but no, Trudeau came in, I think was 142 seats or something. It was just a massive victory, and I really am proud of being part of that.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Do you remember, did you travel with Pierre Elliott Trudeau when he was
did not, no, but I had him in the office, and I felt the electricity of just being next to him. Now, I have a very dear friend by the name of Leona Boyd, the classical guitarist.
Yes, of course.
She dated him for 8 years. And we have very interesting chats about her time with him.
Oh my gosh, that is the coolest. So you have stayed in contact with Lena Boyd?
We've been friends 5 years this month.
Oh my gosh.
I would say I'm a confidant and friend, but she's a marvelous lady, very talented.
Yes, she is extremely talented. I have one of her CDs. So, Robert, when you were in the middle of all of this political action in the 70s, was there, do you believe that there was like a sense of optimism at that time in our country?
Oh, I would say absolutely yes. I think we came out of a high in Expo 67 and we never got back on the ground. I mean, this is the most, we're talking about Chrétien, okay? I was speechwriter for Don Johnson in the 1974 campaign. And 1984 campaign. And we were at an event in Vancouver, and we're in those hotel rooms where they sort of have glass on one side, and that's where the corridor is. Chrétien is late, and all of a sudden you can see the cameras from the TV coming down the corridor, and then he came into the room. I felt all tingly. I mean, when he gets up and does his Canada's #1 speech, you just you just tremble all over. The guy is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely. Oh, Dan is okay.
yeah.
So, Robert, we're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to pick it right back up again, because I'd like to talk some more about the history and what drew you to be researching and documenting much of the history of the First Nation people. So we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Welcome back to ONNtv. I'm here with Robert MacBain, a prolific author, researcher, historian. Now, we were just going to get into some of the things that Robert has been researching. Robert MacBain has written several books, but two of them are Their Home and Native Land and Two Lives Crossing. So, Robert, let's start with Their Home and Native Land, because much of the context for this book is researched right here in this geography where I am sitting today in Bawating. So can you talk to me? What drew you to want to learn about this, research it, and then document it for all to read?
Well, I have been observing what we'll call the Aboriginal file for more than 50 years.
Right.
As a reporter in Canadian newspapers in the 60s, a consultant to the Department of Indian Affairs in the 1970s, and in writing the books. And to do the book, Their Home and Native Land, I have 100 hours of taped interviews with 30 very knowledgeable Ojibways, Crees, and Mohawks.
Yes.
And as a result of that, I am probably, modestly, one of the most informed people in the country. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I do the research is when I read stuff in the paper or watch TV or hear something on radio, I say, where in the world did that come from? Yeah. Because it is so alien to the facts that I came across in my research. For example, we have a prime minister who talks about restoring a nation-to-nation relationship with the First Peoples. We never had a nation-to-nation relationship. So how can you restore a nation-to-nation relationship that never existed? And there just seems to be so much. Just one example. My wife, you mentioned, she is from Italy. Maria's from Poffi, Italy. According to the 2011 census, if you put all of the status Indians living on the reserves, the non-status in the cities and rural areas, the Métis and the Inuit together, you get 4.3% of the Canadian population. Okay. That's less than the Italian origin, because in the 2011 census, 4.4% put themselves down as being of Italian origin. And even out of that 4.3%, let's say it's 4. So, Lynn, we're in a room with 100 people.
Okay.
There's 96 people lined up against this wall. 4 people lined up against the other wall, right. And the 4 guys say, hey, let's have a partnership. It just doesn't make any sense. Okay. And so we have this fixation on trying to create something new out of something that didn't exist. I know I'm not making sense there, but I just find like the residential schools,
right.
An absolutely appalling chapter in Canadian history.
Yes.
But to go beyond that and call it genocide, no, I just don't go for that.
Okay, yeah, because you have written extensively. You've been writing in editorials to different newspapers. You were called upon recently to weigh in on the Senator Lynn Bayak's commentary.
Yes. I would consider myself a friend of Lynn Bayak's. I feel partially responsible for the mess she got herself into, because part of her speech in March of last year was something that I had written about the Langevin block being renamed.
Right.
Lynn Bayak had read my book. She actually gave 10 copies to fellow senators. A lot of her stuff came out of my book, but I had to publicly dissociate myself from her because there ain't no abundance of good in the residential schools. Right. So in trying to present a positive picture. She went so overboard, and I've told her that over and over again.
Right, yeah. And do you think that, now this is just a quick question, but do you think that she should have removed those posts from her website, all of the commentaries that she posted?
Um, she would be censoring them if she did, because
Yes.
I wrote a piece for C2C Journal, and I went through all of the letters. And I would say out of 104 letters that were written between March and May, there were 4, maybe 5 that I would consider offensive, a couple racist. But they were the exception that proved the rule.
Right.
And there were letters there condemning the churches, condemning the government, complaining about the loss of culture, the loss of English, and if she was the racist she's supposed to be, she wouldn't be posting those letters.
I got you, yeah.
And part of the problem, I have experience in crisis communications. My approach that I developed was required reading at the Wilfrid Laurier School of Business and Economics. I offered to help her when this thing broke. The leader's office told her to keep her mouth shut and not to do anything.
Oh my gosh.
It could have been avoided.
Okay. Now the going back to their home and native land, it takes the reader in behind treaty making, and a substantial section of history is recorded there. It's definitely worth people picking up. So can you give us like a little overview of maybe one story that really resonated with you when you were writing their home and native land? I know you mentioned Tuesday.
Yeah,
yeah.
Sorry, let's just on the nation to nation thing.
Okay.
When you see, people don't seem to understand that when we celebrate the 150 years of Canada, it's not 150 years, because the only people who formed a confederation at that time were the ones in what is now Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. So Prince Edward Island was not in.
Okay.
None of the prairie provinces were in. And it was only about 3 years after Confederation, 1867, that we took over the lands that had been controlled by the Hudson Bay Company. Up until that time, all of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Northern Ontario, Northern Quebec was under the control of the Hudson Bay Company. So one of the first things the new country of Canada in 1867 had to do 3 years into its life was figure out what to do with the approximately 40,000 Blackfoot, Ojibways, and Crees living between Thunder Bay and the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. 40,000 people. The population of Canada, when the first treaty was negotiated, was about 3.5 million.
Okay.
40,000 people was less than half the population of Montreal, which was 100,000. So to think that this 3.5 million is having a nation-to-nation discussion with these scattered bands out in the prairies is kind of nuts. But anyway, it was very important to reach an agreement with them, because they had understandably been taking issue with the surveyors out there surveying their land, of the roads going through their lands, of people building houses and stuff on their land. So we had to have some sort of an accommodation. But on the nation-to-nation thing, when they negotiated the first treaty in 1871, it was at what is now Winnipeg.
Okay.
At that time, before the negotiations started, the chief said they wanted 4 Swampy Cree who were in jail to be released before the negotiations could start. Well, imagine if this is a nation-to-nation between France and England, and you got 4 French guys in the English jail. I mean, they were in jail. And they said, we have to have them released. And Lieutenant Governor David Laird said, if you make this as a demand, I can't do it. But if you ask it as a favor from Her Majesty to let these people out of jail, then I'm pretty sure she would agree to do it as a favor, but not as a demand. And they said, okay, it's a favor. So they released them from jail. But my point being, they were Hudson Bay employees, boatmen. They had abandoned their posts. They were given the option of paying a fine or going to jail. 4 of them were in jail. But if you're having a nation-to-nation negotiation, you don't have four of my guys in your jail.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned Laird, because Laird, Ontario, is just a few miles east of Sault Ste. Marie.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a rural area. It's lovely there. Now let's talk a little bit about the Robinson Huron Treaty is mentioned in their home and native land. The Robinson
Yes.
Huron, have you been following the recent? They've been opening up the Robinson Huron Treaty Trust has been took that to the provincial court to have that opened up, to have it looked at for the annuity clause. Were you
Yeah.
looking at that? Yeah.
I took a brief look at that, and the the Robinson Huron Treaty, 1850, I believe, 1850,
Yes.
1851.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can say something that was agreed to, like, for example, the Louisiana Purchase, when Napoleon sold Louisiana to the US for X amount, the French can't come along today and say, well, actually, no, in today's dollars, we should be getting a lot more money. It doesn't make sense. And particularly, I've read a few things about people talking about increasing the annuities, but they don't take into fact that there's absolutely nothing in the Robinson Huron Treaty or any of the other treaties about housing, about water, about sewers. So I remember Martin O'Connell was a labor minister in Trudeau's government, and we talked about the white paper, and he was one of the authors of the white paper, and the whole business about the treaties. I said, okay, fine. So let's say we will agree with you that we will honor the treaties. You get $5 a year plus money for your ammunition and twine, and that's it. Nothing else. Nobody takes into the fact that we're spending, I think it's 12 or 13 billion a year for First Peoples.
It was, I think,
Go ahead.
sorry, Robert, I think it was specifically was the escalator clause, that it had not been raised from $4 for all these years that have passed by. So, but can we just move to the work that you're doing right now, because this is pretty exciting stuff. You've been to Kenora a number of times this past summer, and you're doing some research around the residential school that is in Kenora, that was in Kenora, I should say. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are some of the reflections that you have as you continue to write this next book?
Okay, my second book, Their Home and Native Land, was dedicated to the memory of a tortured Ojibwa soul by the name of Brian Tuesday, who never, ever recovered from the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse that he was subjected to at St. Margaret's in Port Francis and at St. Joseph's in Thunder Bay.
Right.
And in fact, when he was an adult, his sense of self-loathing was so strong that he would look in a hotel room mirror, in a washroom, for example, and he couldn't stand the look of that tortured face looking back at him. He'd smash his fist into the window. And to me, that was a soul-destroying experience. Then I start reading about Charlie Wenjack.
Yes.
Who wasn't even attending a residential school at the time of his tragic death. And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute, where's all this coming from? And so I started digging into the story, and I find out that it started with an article in Maclean's magazine in February 1967.
That's right.
And Mike Downey, the brother of Gord, said he came across the article and he gave it to Gord, and they decided to write about Charlie Wenjack.
Yeah.
But the problem is, Cecilia Jeffrey was run by the Women's Missionary Society of the Presbyterian Church in Canada.
Yeah,
Protestant. They've turned it into a Catholic institution, complete with nuns and priests, nuns delousing naked Ojibwe boys, priests watching naked boys having a shower. And I'm saying, why, if you want to tell the story about Charlie Wenjack, and by the way, his name is Charlie.
Yes, yeah.
All the media in Canada calls him Cheney because Secret Pat says Cheney, brackets, misnamed Charlie by his teachers, Wenjack. Well, the family has always called him Charlie. His gravestone says, in loving memory, son Charles Wenjack,
Okay.
1954, 1966. You see his sisters Daisy and Pearl. They were at Dundas Public School, Junior Public School in Toronto. There was a little Chinese boy there. And Pearl leaned over to Daisy and said, "Doesn't he look like Charlie?" And I'm saying, wait a minute, I thought his name is supposed to be Cheney, right? So where Gord Downie and those people came up with the name Cheney, and a lot of this stuff, they talk about the boy escaping from the school.
Mm-hmm.
There were no prison-like conditions there. The kids were free to wander at will. In fact, the principal from 1958 to 1966, he used to leave sandwiches in the bush because he'd know they'd be hungry, but he also knew they'd be home in time for supper. So I have great empathy for the staff who were there at that time. And one of them, for example, was so emotionally wrought by reading all this stuff about Cecilia Jeffrey, his fingers started to break out in boils. There are those who will not look at Secret Path, won't talk about it. So I feel some sense of obligation to them to try and set the record straight about what actually did happen, and also scratching our heads to say, how did a little boy who was not attending a residential school become the poster child for all that's wrong with the residential schools? There's something seriously wrong here. And now this book is being taught as a true story in 40,000 classrooms across Canada. What's going to happen to those kids when they find out that story is false? How is that going to affect their attitude towards the true stories of, for example, my friend Brian Tuesday and the hundreds of others who truly were sexually and physically abused? There's something seriously wrong. And now the Trudeau government has given the Gord Downie and Cheney Wenjack Fund $5 million to help spread more misinformation in the schools. I think it's outrageous.
Right. Well, the Secret Path certainly has elevated the story of residential schools. And the Cheney Wenjack's, or Charlie Wenjack story doesn't fit with what the facts are, what you have researched as the facts are saying. So what you're attempting to do with the next book is to try and put on public record and document the actual story of that school. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Robert, I have to tell you that I cannot even believe that we are out of time. Like it's just blowing my mind here.
It's been a pleasure.
We have so much to talk about, but maybe we can pick this up again, Robert, and when the book is ready. When do you expect, and do you have a name for the next book?
I haven't got a name, but I believe it'll be out in May.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we will absolutely look for that. And Robert, thank you so much to share your life's work with us, and all the best as you continue on the journey of documenting our history and our Canadian way of life. So thank you.
Thank you, Lynn Brown. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview with author Robert MacBain. On next week's episode of Seniors Calling, where we will have some creepy crawly critters in the studio, courtesy of Intomica. Three of the staff from Intomica, including John Dedes, the biologist, Sarah, and Eva, will be sharing the Science for Seniors program. They have been doing this initiative, and it's a fantastic addition to Science North and our science festival that we have locally here. And the fundraising effort is underway, and we're going to talk about all of that on our next episode of Seniors Calling. So I hope you come back and get introduced to some of the great bugs from Intomica.